Hi, everyone. Welcome again to another Come Let Us Reason podcast. My name is Lenny, president of Come Reason Ministries, and we should have a great podcast for you today. I'm going to be talking with Dr. Sai Gart, who's a biochemist, has an illustrious career in the sciences, but he's recently been more well known for his books that he's created. His first book talked about why he changed from being a materialist, an atheist, into a believer. That was titled The Works of His Hands. But his recent book that's just coming out now, Science and Faith in Harmony, is another exploration, not merely for the student of the sciences, but actually for everyone to engage in understanding how science and faith are not merely compatible, but complementary to one another, and how they both can point to the existence of God. So stay tuned for our conversation on this. Come let us reason together. Well, welcome again, everyone. As I said, this is Lenny Esposito, and I am joined with Dr. Sai Gart, who is professor emeritus at New York University. He has written some 200 articles in peer-reviewed publications. He received his PhD in biochemistry from City University of New York, and we are excited to have him here. So I welcome, first of all, glad to have you on the program.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Well, you have been actually busy. It's funny how two things are true. First of all, people in academia never seem to slow down. That matter of fact, I remember people were talking about when you look at, say, the Indiana Jones movies, and they just released the latest one, and people were talking about all of the far stretches you have to do in Hollywood. And one person said, yeah, and look at how old he is. And, how would anybody be teaching in anthropology and archaeology at that age? And a reply was, well, actually, that's probably the most realistic aspect of the entire film. Nobody seems to step down and slow down in academia. So you have been going for many years now, almost 50 years, I would think your career is. Is that correct?
Yeah, more or less. I got my PhD in my mid-20s and did a postdoc, and then I eventually climbed up the academic ladder to full professor at NYU. And then I went to some other places. I've been at University of Pittsburgh, at Rutgers. And then to round it all off, I ended up leaving academia and going to the NIH, where I was a division director for about 6 years.
Okay. Now,
I'm sorry. Then I retired, but my retirement has not been at all retiring.
Right. Right. No, nobody in Christian ministry actually retires. That's true.
Exactly. Exactly.
Do you now? I'm friends with Ann Gower, who worked at NIH for a few years. Did you ever run into Ann?
I know the name. I don't remember if I.
She worked on that. She worked on. Yeah, it was interesting because when COVID broke out, we were talking to her because she worked on SARS-1. And and she was there for several years, and she's now with Reasons to Believe. So that's why.
Right.
So anyway, but first, if you could just, I know you have a book on it, but just for our audience, could you maybe quickly summarize your journey from young person to interested in science to someone who comes to embrace the Christian faith?
Yeah. The journey was about as long as it could be, because where I started out, I wasn't just a lukewarm Christian or maybe someone who just was an atheist. I grew up in a family that went back 3 generations of very strong atheists and communists.
Yeah, you say militant atheist in
militant atheist. Yeah, so I was not someone who would use the definition that's very popular these days, which, by the way, I don't believe. But anyway, the definition saying that I just don't have enough evidence to believe in God. I'm sure you've heard that. No, that wasn't me. I knew there was no God. It was impossible. There couldn't be one. God was the whole idea was evil. Christianity was terrible. A lot. If you take the worst of what Hitchens and Harris and Dawkins say about faith, that was mild compared to where I was. So there was no hint of any possible interest in God or certainly Jesus. I knew nothing about any of it. And that was true for, it remained true during my college years and as I've gone into graduate school. But what happened was, I'm just summarizing this, as you said, the details are in that book. I was learning things in science that didn't quite jibe with the kind of logical story that I had built about reality, which is that it's all reductionism, materialism. There's nothing outside of that. I didn't believe in anything spiritual or any of what's, woo, as the term is often used, right? So, however, when I had to learn about quantum theory because I was a chemistry major, and when you solve the Schrodinger equation, you learn about quantum physics, and that didn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
And that didn't seem rational or reasonable or logical or any of the other things that's supposed to be, the way the world works. So that kind of threw me off. And then, of course, I went to graduate school in biochemistry, and I started learning the details about how life works. And that was a shock. I mean, that was really amazing. And the unfortunate part about all that is that it's extremely difficult to explain all of that to a lay audience, because in order to understand, for example, how proteins are made in just the right way, it just takes so much knowledge and technical understanding to even begin to explain it. So one of the challenges I've had in both these two books, and I'm actually writing a third one, is to try to do that in a way that people can understand. And I think I was moderately successful in the first book, at least from the feedback I've gotten, and we'll see how the rest goes. But for a graduate student who's learning all the reality and details about how all these amazing machines and systems work in biology, it didn't make me a theist. It didn't make me believe in God, but it shook to the foundations my belief that everything is easily explained by scientific reason, and eventually we'll know everything. And that's just not true. It just turns out not to be true.
There's so much there. I know that in reading David Berlinski, how he talks about RNA World Hypotheses, and you have, of course, the chicken and the egg problem, where you have the DNA and the transcription necessary in order to create the proteins, but you need the proteins in order to unlock the DNA. And then there's the folding issues that there's just, as you say, there's just so much there. And then in quantum physics, that's a whole other. Matter of fact, we're still struggling with that. I have, you read things like delayed choice double slit experiments, for example, which are seemingly not merely the fact that you can't predict whether it's going to act like a wave or a particle, but even if you choose not to choose ahead of time and you look after the fact, it's almost like the system knew you were going to choose in the future, and therefore in the past it recorded the system and it's just, my friend Michael Strauss, who works at CERN, I'm going to have to have him on and explain that to me, because I'm still wrestling with it.
Yeah, he's terrific. I've been reading his work recently, and wow, right on target.
Well, anybody who works at CERN, I mean, that's quite a gig for a.
Well, and also his comment. I mean, we're on exactly the same page, only in different fields. So yeah, he's great. You were saying that people in ministry don't retire. Well, the other people who don't retire are scientists, and I have actually been working in science, not in a laboratory, but in theoretical biology. And my interest is the origin of life and everything around it. So I've actually published 3 or 4 papers. One is now, I just submitted another one, which relate to the origin of life. and it's a fascinating topic. And I don't. I'm sure you know who Jim Tour is.
Yes,
Jim Tour.
he's getting quite a lot of publicity as of late.
He's getting a lot of attention, and he's a friend, and we talked about this, and he's completely right. I mean, we are so far from understanding how life could have possibly originated on this planet. And to me, and I think he would agree with this from what he said. As I said, we've had some discussions, but I think we're not going to make progress until we find an entirely new way of looking at the problem. And I think that that new way, or new ways, we don't know, are going to involve things that biology has excluded up till now, because they point too much to something outside of what we now define as the natural world. For example, purpose, teleology, agency. I mean, you can't use those terms in a biological paper today, although people are starting to do it, and they're not theists. There are people doing it because everyone has begun to realize it was a big mistake to rule out these things.
Right. Yeah.
In biological science. And it was only done to try to shore up biology as a, quote, real science, right? Because physics has no teleology. There's no purpose when a volcano blows up. It's just following laws. Biology is not like that. It's completely different. It's
there's an end to it. There's a target.
Exactly. So, it's a fascinating subject. Getting back to my own story, I was nowhere near any of that at the time. I was just trying to make sense of what I was doing. And I wasn't really thinking about God in any sense by myself. What happened was, and again, this is detailed in the book, and I'm not going to go into any detail on it now because it would take too long anyway. But God came to me. I had dreams. I had experiences. Actually, when I thought about it later, I realized it started when I was 16, a full atheist. I was being called, and eventually, the two dreams that I had were so powerful that I really had to start thinking that maybe there is something out there besides, the pitiless indifference that Richard Dawkins talks about, and something else going on. And, I finally allowed myself to go to a church. A friend of mine asked me if I wanted to go. And I had never been in a church. I'm in my 40s now. I'd never been in any house of worship my entire life. And I was terrified, but when I went, it was very nice. I mean, people were very friendly. There was nobody being, burnt at the stake inside the church, which is kind of what I expected.
Wow. It's amazing how much we build up in our minds. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is, what I had, the propaganda I had taken in as a kid was, you wouldn't believe it. And, this is coming directly from the Soviet Union. This is hardcore stuff. And no, I didn't really expect to see, burning people, but I was surprised that people were welcoming. I mean, I was such a infidel, sinner, whatever you want to call it. I couldn't believe that they smiled at me. I mean, and I eventually started even reading that forbidden book, called the New Testament, which I had never looked at. I think I studied it a little bit at school, but with complete contempt. I don't even think I remember reading it. And was very surprised at what I read. First of all, some of it seemed like it was absolutely true. When I read the book of Acts, I was expecting to see strong evidence of people making things up. Well, that's not what you get when you read the book of Acts.
Yeah, it's very much not mythology.
It's history. It happened. I mean, this, and and then when you read the rest of the Bible, you realize, wait a minute, the good guys are not that good. What kind of a book is this? The heroes, King David, give me a break. I mean,
yeah. Even Peter, right? He's like
Peter.
Paul has to dress him down, and he puts his foot in his mouth more times than not. And
And Paul himself, had his 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 issues. And and then I started reading what Jesus actually said, and he didn't say oppress the masses. He didn't say that at all. Quite the opposite. He talked about the lost, right? I mean, I don't have to tell you what's in the gospel, but that was a revelation to me. I mean, I was lied to, obviously. I mean, I already knew I'd been lied to about communism, but now I realized I was lied to about Christianity. And I was getting very interested in this, and I was getting very close, but I couldn't quite bring myself over until I had a waking experience, which is in great detail in the book, in my car alone, where the Holy Spirit came to me. And I mean, I can summarize it very quickly, which is simply that I was driving and I heard a Christian radio station and I turned it off. And I started thinking about what it would be like if I gave a sermon, which was already kind of crazy. Why would I would never give a sermon. And the next thing I knew, I was giving a sermon to myself, and words didn't come from me. And the bottom line of that sermon was that I was telling people, I know that Jesus loves all of you because he loves even me.
Wow. Wow, that's awesome.
I burst into tears, and I said out loud, I believe. That was it. And whew, the world changed. I mean, you've heard this many times, right? There's so many testimonies like that. Everything just changed. I was filled with joy. It's never left me. This was 15 years ago or more.
Wow.
And eventually it took a little time, but I eventually became open. I mean, I believed in Jesus. I believed in God, but I didn't tell many people. I didn't tell my colleagues. I didn't know what to make. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know any other Christians. Eventually, though, I joined a church. I got baptized at the age of 65, and even became the lay leader in my church. So here I am. And then the next thing, after I retired, I started writing down things, all of this stuff, and I'm still doing it.
Well, that's a great story. There's so much I want to talk to you about, but let me ask you at least one question
Sure.
at the end of all of that, because it changes the way you do your science in the sense that not that your methodology changes.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to talk about methodology. I don't know if you've ever read A Signature in the Cell by Stephen Meyer. Okay,
Yeah.
So he makes a point, which I thought was one of the more prescient points in the book that people don't talk about, was the fact how Frederick Waller, when he was doing his experiments and he discovered, how to synthesize urea.
Right.
Felt he was gypped. He felt like there was a con played on him that we were as natural scientists somehow being excluded from these life performing mechanisms, and the reaction against the vitalists of the day, and you got to go back and understand that there was two sets of ideas, that living organisms can never be replicated scientifically, but non-living processes could be explored. That was the idea. But he felt that we should never then close those things off, and science should therefore always seek to understand these things. And it almost swung too far the other direction, where you actually have to take a materialist or a naturalist presupposition in order to do good science. So it swung. Right. But now you're a believer, and when you start to study these things, when you start to see God's fingerprints, his messaging system, all of this stuff, does it fill your science with wonder? Does it fill you with an awe, maybe, that's different than what it would have been before?
Yeah, there's no question about it. Well, I'm not sure how different, because, and this is a very good question, actually, because as a scientist doing science when I was still an atheist, I felt awe. I felt awe when I found results that were unexpected and amazing. Didn't happen very often, but when I did, or when I read about other people who did, when I read about other results that were just, wow, that's just amazing, that's fantastic. And you know, I was in graduate school, and and then got my PhD in the 70s, which was a period of huge explosion of molecular biology research, and it was just wonderful. It was fascinating, and I remember just thinking, "Oh, this is so great! It's so great." The difference is when you begin to believe in the designer, creator, God. You don't just say, "Oh, this is wonderful. This is great." You say, "Thank God for how wonderful your creation is for what you did." So it's not any different in a way from the feeling of awe, from the appreciation of the wonders that science can reveal, but something is added to it. And what's added is you know where it came from. You have a now you can't prove that, of course. We can never prove God through science. I mean, you can prove God through other ways, but science is not built to prove God.
Yeah, it's not its
However,
point.
that's right, exactly. However, it's the next best thing. I mean, as I said, every time, and it's wonderful now to read the literature because there's so much stuff coming out. It seems like every day there's another paper. I mean, we now know there have been papers in the last few years showing that single cells like bacteria have cognition. They make decisions. They act as a group, bacteria. They can do things that up until recently we thought only we and maybe a few other mammals can do. It's all through life. Cognition is everywhere. I didn't know this until
Yeah, there's and that brings a whole second set of questions in
sure.
when you're talking about panpsychism versus substance dualism. That's a big philosophical thing. But I will say that even philosophers like Thomas Nagel,
Yeah,
in his book Mind and Cosmos, how the neo-Darwinian model is almost certainly wrong, and he got a lot of flack from that. Now, Nagel is an atheist; he is not a theist, but he's
right.
one of these guys that you're talking about that says there's
Yeah,
more. You can't just make inanimate matter become conscious. You just can't
right.
do that.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, I
so
mean that's right. And there's something about life. I mean, what I like to say, and I think I have it in my second book. I'm getting now confused what I wrote where, but there should not be life. There shouldn't be anything alive. Living systems are so amazingly different from anything else in the universe that there doesn't seem to be any reason that anything is alive. It. I mean, maybe there's life all over the universe or all over the galaxy. I don't know. I kind of doubt it, but that's another story. But we do know that life exists. We're here, and so are bacteria and all kinds of other organisms. And it's just incredible what all of life can do and does. And yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
it's kind of why Francis Crick kind of came up with the whole panspermia
Yeah,
thing that he was because he just couldn't get over the
right.
fact that of the implications of life.
Panspermia is making a huge comeback now because all the data seems to suggest that life was present on Earth almost immediately after the cooling, after the initial bombardment phase, like 4.2 million years ago. Now, that not everybody agrees with that. It still needs verification, but there is some evidence that I saw recently published that put the beginning of life at 4.2 billion years. That's 100 million years after the Earth, came to a temperature where life was even possible. That's incredible. So, panspermia, I mean, who knows? Because it doesn't answer the question because we don't know where it came from and how it started. But I don't know. I mean, it's a fascinating area. And I just love the idea that the more we find in science, especially biology, but also in physics, as Michael Strauss says, the more we point to God. It's science. The atheists are in the wrong camp. I think that if you're a strong atheist, eventually you're going to reject science because science is not pointing to atheism. It's pointing to the reality.
Well, that's a really interesting point on several fronts. Of course, we're seeing a little bit of this in that in the medical field, for example, politics seems to start to overshadow some individuals' trust in science. So you get the biological question where you have transgenderism and there are individuals who hold medical degrees who are teaching at prestigious institutions who start to deny the existence of men and women as biologically driven. But beyond that, more recently, we're seeing a lot of things. And there was always this thing. I was a physics major in my undergrad. Mm-hmm. So I didn't finish with a physics degree, but that was where I started. And there was always this thing where the hard sciences would kind of look at the soft sciences, the anthropology guys or the sociology guys, and kind of dismiss them as, well, they're nice, but they're not quite doing real science. And then the studies came out to show that when you try to replicate the results of their published works, their published studies, I mean, they're failing at least 60% of the time. But right. Now I'm hearing that kind of error is starting to creep into the hard sciences, where there are certain individuals who are hoping for an outcome, and it's not nearly as prevalent, I would say. I don't think that they're finding these things left and right, but it is getting more attention these days that there's an ideology that kind of motivates this. Of course, right. Whenever there's grant money involved and publish or perish is part of the academia underculture, you're going to get this. But do you see more of a bias or a predisposition to try and go in a certain direction regardless of where the science is going? Because I think you're right. It's more that we uncover things. It seems to be that as the God hypothesis puts out, it seems to be that we're finding more reasons to believe in God than yeah. Fewer. So
what I think is that there's a huge spectrum in this issue. There are people who may have degrees in some science. I mean, one example is Sam Harris. I mean, he was an atheist and he was interested in neuroscience, and he decided he should get a PhD so that he could have, more gravitas. So he got a PhD in psychology. And after that, he was presenting himself as a neuroscientist. And of course, all of this was based on ideology. It had nothing to do with objective science. That's an extreme. There are very few people of that side. However, there are people who, as you said, mix ideology with science of all kinds, yeah. Not just, you pointed out one example.
P.Z. Myers may be one person that comes to mind right away.
Yeah, I know him, and I would say he has a lot more integrity than Sam Harris. When he talks about philosophy and his own ideology, he's very clear that that's what it is. I haven't seen him distort science, frankly, at all. I think he has to be honest. It's very hard to do that as a scientist, and very few do, because our training is so strong. When you go to graduate school, you're basically an apprentice, right? Your advisor, your mentor, the master in the old system, right? They tell you what to do and how to think and what is allowed and what is not allowed, and it's strictly enforced. And when you then get on your own, there's more of that, restraints and constraints to prevent you from leaving the path. That doesn't mean people don't. Many do. But, I learned that ideology is the enemy of science, even scientific ideology. You can I mean, I think the whole field of evolution is a great example of this. The neo-Darwinian modern synthesis has been ruling for decades. And there was a period not that long ago when if you tried to publish anything that, maybe was a little off that, including some of the work that is now totally accepted, like Stephen Jay Gould's work on punctuated equilibrium, even the neutral theory by Kimura, which is now absolutely baked into the basic theory. At the time, it was considered heretical. And not long ago, I heard Richard Dawkins in a debate with, of all people, Lynn Margulis and Dennis Noble, say that epigenetics was not important in evolution. And of course, that was 4 years ago. Now, of course, it's funny, right? Because how do you dismiss epigenetics, right? So there is a trend that's growing. And as I said before, it's not just theists. In fact, I think it's largely non-theists who are seeing that it's not true that if you dismiss the neo-Darwinian synthesis, you're suddenly anti-science and you're a crazy creationist. It's not that kind of divide, good, bad, yes, no. And that's why evolutionary theory is moving so rapidly into new directions.
Yeah, I saw a
anymore as to what it used to be.
I saw a panel discussion, and I can't remember where it was, several years ago, where Dawkins was on the panel with J. Craig Ventnor and others.
I saw that, yeah.
And Ventnor kind of questioned the whole tree of life. He says it doesn't, and Dawkins almost fell off his chair going, how can you, but Ventnor has, I think his last works, he stripped it down. He like, the bare bones you need is 100,000 sequence DNA in order to get any kind of self-replicating living organism. And he reverse engineered a bacteria. Yeah. And it's like taking a Volkswagen and throwing out everything you don't need. It's just the frame and it runs. That was kind of what he did. But interestingly also, they put, I remember, and this was fascinating because they encoded their email addresses into the DNA, and there was a whole thing where you can, if you could be a smart graduate student, you might be able to win a prize. But here's the whole point of that. Well, if we're talking, that it's an intelligence that's doing that, because so if it's the intelligence to find an email address, how much more is the intelligence to create an entire system of living attributes using the same coding structure, which is just amazing.
Well, I mean, you're bringing up a very good example of what I said. I started noticing several years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I do a lot of interacting with atheists on social media, and I started noticing this new idea that I'd never seen before, which is that the genetic code is not really a code. There's no language in DNA, is not part of language, and it's not a language or whatever. And where did this come from? I couldn't believe it. And I've been exploring it. And I don't know where it came from originally, but it's crazy because what atheists are now have been saying, and I think some of them realize this is nonsense and have stopped doing it, but many of them are still saying that the logic that DNA is a code and codes need a coder, therefore there is a intelligent coder, is wrong. And the reason they say it's wrong is because DNA is not a code. So in other words, is this the definition of ideology? You deny a scientific fact? And by the way, there's a guy named John Perry who has a very good YouTube channel on science. He's not a theist. He's an atheist, but he's very good, very smart. He did an interview with Richard Dawkins and brought this issue up to him. And Dawkins said, "What? That's ridiculous. Who says it's not a code?"
Even computer scientists look at this and they say, "Oh my gosh, that's exactly what we do."
And every biologist knows that the genetic code is a real code. I mean, there's not. This is coming from atheist ideology, and it's anti-science. This is what I call my prophecy. That if this keeps going on with not just this, but the whole idea that the universe had a beginning in the Big Bang is now under attack by atheists because they don't like that either. That's a pointer to God too.
Right.
So it's past eternal. It's just, it's bouncing back and all kinds of things, even though it goes against, and I don't know this field well, but there's something called the Vilenkin theorem, which says it's past eternal.
Gorde, Booth, and Vilenkin, right.
Exactly. So these are two examples. There'll be more because we're going to keep making more discoveries, which are going to tell us you can't explain this one without, invoking some kind of divine, however you want to define it, something beyond what we now consider purely naturalistic causes.
Well, just your point that you brought up, 100 million years, and if we see a microbial life at that point, it's simply not enough time for evolution to do its work. It makes no sense whatsoever. And I don't know if you've followed Michael Behe's work with Richard Lentz and the citrate eating bacteria and all like that, and where he actually calculates out what rate DNA needs in order to have any kind of a morphology to it, right? So I think Lentz's E. coli experiments have it at about 30,000 generations that it took before the one subfamily of E. coli was able to digest citrate in I think it was a non-oxygen state, or I'm forgetting some of the details on it, but when you calculate that out, it's just you just don't have enough time for larger animals, larger organisms who take several years. They don't replicate in minutes or days. They take years and years to come to maturity and replicate. They're just simply, again, there's not enough time to get that level of differentiation in their body plans, basically.
Yeah. The interesting thing about all of that work in microorganisms is that what is now coming out, I mentioned this example before, the example of cognition-based evolution. We always, part of the neo-Darwinian synthesis, modern synthesis, was that all mutations are random, and then you have natural selection. So if you end up with a rare but positive mutation, beneficial mutation, that takes over and is adaptive and takes over the population. But it's always been believed that mutations are purely random, and there's cells and organisms can't do anything about it. Looks like that's not true. It looks like there are mechanisms for non-random mutations. In other words, it may be possible. Again, this is very new, so it's not firmly established, but it may be possible that some organisms, especially bacteria, can actually choose their evolutionary path.
So is this kind of akin to
that's not Darwinism anymore?
Yeah, it's almost like there are certain frogs, for example, who can, if there's a lower number of males and females, they can actually change to help stabilize the population. That kind of an idea.
Yeah. That's right.
Well, let's. I can talk about origin of life stuff quite a bit, but let's move to a different areas. Science itself, and why you wrote the book, and how science and faith really come together. First of all, you hear a lot of folks say, well, science says, or science shows, or science proves. And, my first response is, well, science is a methodology. It's not an individual. It's a
Right.
way we try to find truth, but science says nothing scientists do.
Right.
Science may help us discover how to clone a human being. It can never tell us if we should, for example. So, first of all, why don't you kind of talk about a little bit of that, because our modern culture seems to have a real almost holy affinity for science, where science is our priests, if you will. It's right, and we saw this with the CDC and the COVID thing, where everybody was appealing to what the scientists said. Nobody was appealing to what the mental health professionals may have said, or what the spiritual, right? It used to be when somebody when there was a tragedy happen, you would bring in a priest, you'd bring in, this is maybe 50, 80, 100 years ago, and you'd bring people to counsel them about their soul. Now, if somebody shoots somebody, they bring in the neuroscientist to explain what brain chemistry was going on with the shooter or something like that. So it's a vastly different world than it used to be. But this is something that you're hoping to counter, I think, in your book.
Yeah. Well, if there's one ideology that I try to fight against all the time, it's what's called scientism. And, scientism is the belief, which is widely held more than people realize, that all questions can be answered scientifically. Now, the irony of that for me is that my father, who was, as I mentioned, a strict materialist atheist, he was a chemist and a scientist, but he taught me that science cannot answer all questions. Questions, for example, related to society, related to culture, related to music, things of that sort, all of which he was interested in. As a communist, he was interested in, what he considered to be justice. And that was not related to science. Even though Marx pretended to be a scientist, that was a joke. I mean, he didn't know any science. So I learned that from my father, that, science is limited in what it can do. It doesn't answer a huge range of questions. It doesn't. One among the answers that it does not give is almost anything having to do with us as human beings. I've always felt that. Yes, there is psychology, which can tell us a lot. There are various branches of psychology that are very useful, but they're not. And I'm going to sound here like a natural scientist who looks down on social scientists, but there's good stuff that comes from psychology, but it doesn't have some of it does not have the rigor that you really want when you say this is a fact. We've shown it. We've proved it 6 different ways. We have a law. We have a theory. We don't quite get that with social science or the science of humans. I'm not saying these are useless. These are very valuable fields, but they just don't give us that kind of rigor. So, when we start to address what is it like to be a human, what does it mean to be human, we can talk about neurochemistry. We can talk about various genes that encode various, hormones and enzymes. But it doesn't go there. It doesn't explain why people are good or bad. It doesn't explain why we love somebody and not that person and not the other person. It doesn't explain why we do music. Why do we make music? And why do we make incredible music?
Yeah, beauty in general is
Beauty.
Is something.
Yeah.
We look for even beautiful equations, right? When we're
Yeah.
doing our science.
Yes, beauty is everywhere, and it's only everywhere for us. I take your dog to a museum and show him the paintings, and he's probably not going to applaud. I mean, I even include humor. I mean, when I watch Billy Crystal or some of the great comedians. I mean, wow, where does that come from? Why are we funny? What is it? What is a joke? These are hard questions, and they all have to do with what I eventually figured out was the answer, which is we're made in the image of God. It's so simple. Now, it doesn't give us a scientific answer because we don't know scientifically what that means. but we don't have to.
Right. It's the wrong. I tell people it's the wrong tool. Science is
Yeah,
a method that you use to uncover the wonders of the natural world, the way the
that's
natural
it.
world works. But when you get outside of the natural world, then you might as well. It's like using a screwdriver to bake a cake. It's the
That's
wrong
great.
tool.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And yeah, and there's so many examples of this. So at this point, I don't I'm not upset at the fact that we can't explain human behavior or human genius or anything else you want to say about humans through by scientific. We'll never get the neurochemistry of why Einstein was bright and why Beethoven did what he did and wrote that music. We'll never get there. All we have to do to get there is say, okay, we're not just another animal. We may have evolved in our bodies in some way, but that's not who we are. Who we are our souls, and they came from God. That's all I need. I don't. There's no. I'm not going to. No, we're not going to get any further than that, and that's far enough.
Yeah, and to your point, then, in order for us to be fully human, I think then we have to understand that we need to understand our natural world. We need to understand our health, how our body works, how systems work together, so we don't poison ourselves, so we can make life more livable for more people, so that we
Sure.
can eradicate maybe malaria or at least prevent against it. Right. So science does so many good things, but what we're now seeing is a dearth on the other side. For example, the Centers for Disease Control just came out with a study saying 50,000 people had committed suicide in the United States over the last year, which is the highest number that they've ever seen.
Wow.
And again, you can't. There's no physical laws that can account for that.
Right.
That has to
Right.
be. That's a separate question. Now we're talking about health in a whole different way, and it's not surprising that the more we withdraw from God and our purpose in life, our understanding that we are meant to love God, enjoy Him forever, and through that refine ourselves spiritually. If we draw away from that, then it's not a surprise that we're going to find more and more people lost. Lost in
Yeah.
the sense of just not even knowing how they relate to the world. So,
Absolutely. You know who Justin Brierley is?
yeah, I'm friends with Justin. Yeah.
So you read his book. I mean, it's the surprising rebirth of belief. Uh, you know, I see it myself. I mean, when I started on this journey, I don't know when, maybe 7 years ago, and I started getting on social media and posting things, I got a tremendous amount of very negative reaction from atheists. It's not happening anymore. It happens a little, but not like it used to. And, I think a lot of people are waking up, as Justin talks about. And I don't know if you are aware of this book, which I also have a chapter in. This is Coming to Faith through Dawkins, which came out just a few months ago. And it has 12 essays by former atheists.
Is Peter Byram in that?
Yes,
Yeah, I
Peter's
know
in it.
Peter too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it was edited by Dennis Alexander and Alistair McGrath, two British uh, Christians who were in the sciences. And most of it is not science. My chapter is, and there's a couple of others. But what you get when you read these essays is these were atheists, and they all were listening to the new atheists and saying, "Wait a minute, no, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't make sense, or that doesn't jive with my views about the world and about people." And that, they keep yelling at religion and Christianity. But maybe I should go look at that. And these are 12 people who looked at it and said, I believe, like I did. And if there's 12, there's a lot more than 12.
Yeah, we had Jana Harmon on a
Yeah,
previous,
Jenny.
and she's of course talked to over 100 atheists
Yeah,
now who've converted.
yeah.
Fascinating story.
I've got a. She did one with me as well, so I'm on there.
Good, that's
Side
great.
B.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
She's great, and what I just wanted to say about Justin is that his book is so amazing because people like even a guy named Alex O'Connor cosmic skeptic. I mean, he's not a Christian. He's far from it, but his atheism has changed. I mean, he's much milder, and he'll admit it. He'll admit it. He doesn't quite feel the same way, and I think what you said is the reason for that. It's not working. It's just not working. If the strong atheism of 2009 up to 2012, the London bus campaign, all that in your face, it's dead. It's fallen apart.
yeah, yeah, I agree with that.
And there's a reason for that, because God is not dead. God is with us and alive.
Yeah, that's really important stuff. It's been amazing to me how many times they've written God's epitaph from the 1967 cover of Time magazine on, and
Right.
or even Voltaire, who famously claimed that after his lifetime there would be no more religion, and once he died, the International Bible Society actually bought his house and started producing Bibles out of his house. So, which is irony in its. I mean, I'm reminded of there was a little book on graffiti in school bathrooms, and they would do cute little things where they would draw like a chemical symbol and put a M in it, call it Mercedes benzene and things like this. But one of them was a guy had in one color pen wrote "God is dead, Nietzsche," and underneath it said "Nietzsche is dead, God," which I thought was pretty clever. So, but all that is to say, now your book actually covers several different areas of science. This new book, can you tell me what those are and how you explore that?
Sure. So the book coming out, which it'll be released on January 23rd, but it's available for pre-order. And I'll just say, if anybody pre-orders it and they see it says large print, that's an error. That's going to go away. It's a regular paperback edition.
And we'll link to it. We'll link to it at the bottom of this.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, I of course, as a biologist, I cover a lot of biology and biochemistry, and there's much less technical than my first book, by the way. These are short chapters. There are 45 short chapters. They're 3 or 4 pages, and they cover one area, and each chapter talks about a little bit of the science and a little bit about the harmony of some part of faith. For example, I have a chapter called Pathways, where I talk about the chemical reaction pathways that go on in all of our cells. So you have one chemical which then reacts and forms another chemical, which then reacts and you have a whole pathway of synthetic chemical reactions, which eventually result in something really important for the cell.
Like the immune sequence, for example.
Yeah, well, yeah, oh yeah, that's even more complex. But this would be just normal metabolism. How do we make a fatty acid? That's a long process with lots of chemical reactions along a very specific path. And then I talk about pathways in life, the pathways that we follow as human beings, and the pathway of Jesus Christ, which is also very well marked, very clear. It's the narrow path. And the harmony is that there are pathways everywhere. It's not just in the cells of our body. It's when we walk to the supermarket, we follow a path. When we go to church and we go through the liturgy and we do what we do in church, we're following a path. And Jesus used it all the time. He said, I am the way, I am the path, and we follow him. So that's, to me, that's something I think is, and I use a lot of I use quotations from both scripture. Every chapter starts with a scriptural quotation and a secular quotation from a scientist or somebody like that. And there are many other examples. Yeah, there are 44 other examples where I take something that is, you may not think of it as scientific, or you may not think of it as spiritual, but in fact, it's both. And the harmony is what I talk about. These are not the same thing. Okay, I'm not saying we are like enzymes that catalyze reaction pathways. No, but it's harmonious. So you don't have to choose and say, well, science says this, but faith says that, and they're not the same. No, they're not the same, because when you have two notes that are the same, you don't get harmony. You're just playing the same note twice.
Right. Right.
What's beautiful about science and faith is the harmony. They're saying different aspects of one truth, which is the truth of Jesus.
Now, did you find it difficult to move, because when you're writing, especially at a high academic level, there's almost a supposition that you have to have an air of specificity and complexity in your writing. And now you're writing for a lay audience, and not merely a lay audience, but you're trying to bring it down to a level that's really accessible and things like that. How hard was it to make that transition as a writer? Because it seems to be that what you say is, you want to write, and as soon as you finish one writing project, you'd start another. So it's a whole kind of a different mindset in all of this, I would imagine.
Well, to answer your first question, is it difficult? Yes. It's very difficult.
There's a famous Hemingway line, I think. It says, writing isn't hard. All you do is you sit at your desk and open up a vein.
That's right. I remember that. Yeah, that's one way to look at it. I struggled with this book in some places, and in other places it just flowed. And that's true for all writers writing anything. There are things that just kill you, and there are things where you kill. I mean, as the comedians would say. But the other part of it is that, that's the good thing about having a publisher. I mean, I had lots of editors on this book. And I don't know whether the first draft that I handed in would have been very good. In fact, I know it would not have been very good. So there was some very good editing from people who are not scientists, and they were my target audience, these editors, and they helped. I also had my wife, who is my main editor, and she's not a scientist, although she's probably smarter than any of them, but she helped a lot. Having said all that, though, it's a challenge, but it's one that I enjoy. I welcome it, because, Kurt Vonnegut has a great line, which I just remembered, which is, because he was a scientist, he was a science fiction writer, but he was a chemist. He worked as a chemist. And he said, any scientist who can't explain what they're doing to an 8-year-old is not a good scientist.
Yeah.
And I love that quote. And maybe I'm not thinking about 8-year-olds, maybe 18-year-olds, but that's something that I think is with me. And that quote has real spiritual significance. I mean, it's not just science. If anything you're doing is important in life, you can't just share it with your colleagues. You can, I mean, you should, but if it's something that's really important in the sense of a universal godlike way, that's not enough. You have to bring it out to the people, to the public, to humanity. And it's hard to do. But look at all the people. I mean, you mentioned Steve Meyer, who's great at this. I think Lee Strobel is fantastic. He's a great guy, and his books are amazing. And there's so many really good professional people. I mean, Lee is a journalist, but there are scientists, there are engineers. Michael Strauss, his book. There's so many others. I mean, I have lists of them. This book has a list of books and journal articles and YouTube videos and all kinds of other resources to go further into everything I talk about. So every chapter has this little a little blurb of it's called Seeking Further, and there's a QBR code which goes to a page on my website which has links to all of this material. So if anybody's reading this and saying, well, yeah, but wait a minute, he said something about enzymes, I want to find out more about this enzyme, you can do it very easily. So my primary audience is the general public, but I'm not ignoring people who want to go further and learn more about it.
Oh, that's great to know. So just a couple of quick questions as we come to a close. First of all, in your origin of life research, what area are you specifically investigating?
Yeah, well, I'm going to try to keep it short. What I'm very interested in is what I consider to be the key fundamental principle of all of life, and that's not evolution. What it is replication with high accuracy. Only life can replicate itself. People talk about all kinds of other things, crystals, robots. No, nothing else replicates itself. No machines. NASA's talking about building machines that can go into space and make copies of themselves. They haven't done it. They can't do it. Not yet. I'm not saying it's impossible, but nothing else does it. Nothing natural does it. Crystals don't. I have a whole thing in my next book. I have a whole thing about that. So what I'm interested in is, okay, what's the theory here? In what is the, because I can't do experiments. So what is the theoretical basis for the origin of life that depends on self-replication? Because you can't have evolution unless you have high accuracy self-replication.
Yeah.
You can get a mutation that makes your eyesight incredible. Okay, let's say you're a bird. Now you can see everything around, and you're the best hunter in the forest, right? You can see everything, but your kids didn't get that from you, so there's no evolution. There's no natural selection.
Exactly. It's kind of the question of sex as well, because you start to say, wow, evolution has to get that right pretty much the first time.
Yeah, well, there's so many things like I mean, we can go on forever on this one, and I don't think you want to because we're getting close. But anyway, that's what I'm working on. That's my main thing, and I've written a few papers on that from different angles with some interesting results. These are scientific journals, so I don't talk about God.
Right.
Not yet, anyway. Probably not for a while. But there are theological implications of some of the stuff I've done. Now, it's very minor stuff compared to what else is going on in the field. There's great work going on in many areas. I'm not doing that, but I'm doing what I can. And but my main focus, as you said, is writing for the public. And, I'm fortunate enough to have a great literary agent, great publishers. So, it's not hard to do. It's hard to do, but it's worth doing.
It's interesting. And then there's other, the whole idea of junk DNA and how that's actually changing, and how really intelligent designists predicted the fact that if there is an intelligence who designed us, that this idea of junk DNA will diminish, that you will find uses for it. And we're finding that.
It's diminishing all along. I don't know how far it'll go. In fact, you mentioned P.Z. Myers. We had a bet on what the final percentage of junk DNA will be. And his was higher than mine by a lot, but it was still lower than it used to be.
What are they seeing in
also coming down?
What are they seeing in retroviruses these days?
I'm trying to say that.
What are you seeing in retroviruses these days? Are certain chains misidentified as retroviruses then?
No, I don't know much about. You talk about like things like ERVs and retroviruses that are incorporated into. Yeah, I haven't been following up on that. I can't really tell you anything exciting there, but I'm sure there's stuff going on.
Okay, just curious. Anyway, so any last thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with? Anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah, there's one last thought that I always say, and if anyone has seen any of my other videos, my other appearances, you heard it already, but I'm going to say it again because I always say it. If you are a student, a Christian student, and you are learning in your high school or your college courses that science and faith don't mix, that's a lie. You don't have to, you can love science and be a scientist. You have no reason to give up your faith or even doubt your faith for a minute. Now, that's true for students. It's true for young people in general. It's true for everyone. There is no conflict between science and faith. And that's so provable because almost every scientist you can think of from before 1900 and even after 1900 were Christians in Europe. And if they weren't Christians, they were Muslims or Jews. I mean, they were religious. There's nothing in science that contradicts the existence and power of God. It simply doesn't come up. And unfortunately, there are some teachers and professors around these days who will actually tell you, if they hear you're a Christian, they'll say, well, what are you doing in a biology class or a biochemistry class? That they're wrong. Just ignore them. Don't be swayed. And it goes the other way too. If your pastor says, stay away from science, it's the work of the devil. No, it's not. They go well together. They're in harmony. They play beautiful music. You can see all the examples in the book. And I don't mean to just push my books. There are so many great books on science and faith right now and have been for several years. Just go to Amazon and look for science and religion, and you'll see a wonderful list of books. And, we're not in competition with each other. We're all working together with the same message because this is a message that needs to come out, no matter who says it, who writes it.
So my friend J.P. Moreland has published several books on this as well. And,
absolutely.
I can imagine, say, a grad student who's pursuing not merely a degree in science, but a career, being concerned about that kind of an idea.
Yeah. And, of course, it's easy to imagine because there is an anti-religious bias in academia. I don't know whether it's even the science departments that are the worst. It may be political science and economics that are even worse. I don't know.
You're probably right. Yeah.
But in science, it's there. Put on the armor of God. That's what I've been doing, and that's what so many people have to do. And do what you want to do. Become a scientist and do your work. And and it's not relevant to your faith. And in time, I believe the faith will become more relevant, and the two will come together. So have faith, have hope and trust, pray, but don't give up. Don't give up your faith.
Well, I appreciate that so much. So thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Gart. Pleasure having you on, talking about all these things, letting me kind of geek out a little bit on biochemistry and origin of life stuff, which is always fun to do. So I will be looking forward to the book. Like I said, I'll link to both of your books in the bottom of this podcast here, and hope to talk to you again soon. And we'll definitely see each other online, I'm certain.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you.
Great.
So there you go. That's Dr. Sai Gart. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you have any questions, any comments, please leave them below. And until next time, this is Lenny Esposito saying goodbye. Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.